The morning of February 19th, 2011, began with an uneasy silence for Jessica Freeman. Usually, if her mother didn't answer her phone, she would text, "Busy, call back later." But this time, nothing. No answer, no short reply. Jessica waited another hour, then got in her car and drove to the motel in Saluda where Vanessa was supposed to be the night before. The door to the administrative area was unlocked. This immediately alerted her. Vanessa always locked the room, even if she was only going out for a couple of minutes. Inside, everything looked almost normal. Jessica moved further, deeper into the administrative rooms where the living area was. The door to the bedroom was ajar. Tiptoeing, as if in a nightmare, Jessica pushed it. The mother was lying on her side, not far from the bed. The glass in the clock on the nightstand was broken, and right next to her body was a small shell casing. She froze. At that moment, the inner voice, the one that had previously told her that everything was simply wrong, was already screaming at the top of its lungs. Every crime has its own story, and we're here to tell it to you, our dear viewers. Like, comment, and subscribe. Stay with us. At first glance, the life of Vanessa Mintz appeared to be a shining example of how a person can preserve human dignity, even while enduring trials that might have broken others. Her story began in the rolling hills of North Carolina, where she grew up in a home filled with the rhythm of faith, tradition, and discipline. Vanessa's childhood was shaped by the presence of two remarkable figures, her father and her mother. Her father was a Baptist pastor, a man of firm moral principles who possessed a quiet strength that earned him the admiration not only of his congregation, but also of neighbors and acquaintances throughout the community. His voice carried both authority and kindness, and people knew that his word could be trusted. Vanessa's mother, though she devoted her life to raising her daughters and caring for the home, was far from ordinary. She had a sharp intelligence and a remarkable insight into people's hearts. From her, Vanessa inherited an inner compass that always pointed toward truth. In that family household, the foundation was built on three cornerstones: trust, discipline, and a love that was deeply Christian in its nature. From her earliest years, Vanessa carried herself with an unusual sincerity. She had the rare ability to win confidence almost instantly. People often described her as someone you immediately felt you could call a real person. Those who knew her best remembered her as caring, sometimes a bit strict, but unfailingly loyal to those she loved. Her voice was soft, but her will was firm, and she demonstrated an inner resilience that left an impression on everyone she met. At school, her classmates respected her honesty. As she grew into adulthood, that respect deepened into admiration for her ability to maintain dignity even in the most difficult of circumstances. After completing college, Vanessa sought a profession that seemed steady, practical, and full of opportunity. She entered the world of real estate. Her approach to the job set her apart from many in the field. Clients later recalled that Vanessa did not simply sell houses. She guided people to the places where their futures could unfold. Her work was not about transactions. It was about helping families discover homes where memories would be made. Soon, she became a respected and trusted figure in her city of Hendersonville, known for her unwavering dedication. Yet, in her personal life, stability did not arrive immediately. Her first marriage was brief and did not last, but it gave Vanessa the most valuable gift imaginable: her two daughters, Jessica and Andrea. They became her guiding light, the reason behind her tireless effort and her endless resilience. For their sake, she pushed herself to work from morning until late at night, often sacrificing weekends and personal time. She carried herself with grace, never allowing hardship to erase her belief that life still held the possibility of joy. Indeed, Vanessa did not deny herself the hope of happiness. After several years of focusing on raising her daughters and building her career, she crossed paths with a man who seemed to bring new light into her life. His name was Travis McGraw, a firefighter with a commanding presence and a background in the Air Force Reserves. Their meeting seemed like coincidence, But those who knew Vanessa would say that nothing in her life was ever truly accidental. She had a gift for sensing people's character, for reading what lay beneath the surface. At first, she believed Travis to be reliable, honest, and decent, a man who could stand by her side in both work and joy. Their wedding was not a grand spectacle, but an intimate celebration, filled with warmth and sincerity. For Vanessa, this union represented the chance to open a new chapter, one that promised companionship and partnership. Together, she and Travis invested in a dream project, a small but charming motel nestled in the town of Saluda, just 40 minutes from their home. They named it the Saluda Mountain Lodge. At first glance, the small family business that Vanessa and Travis built together looked unassuming, just a modest roadside lodge tucked away in the quiet town of Saluda. But for Vanessa, it was far more than a business. She saw in it the possibility of creating not just income, but also warmth, stability, and a kind of creative freedom she had long craved. From the moment they signed the deed, she poured herself wholeheartedly into making the lodge special. Each room bore her touch. She personally selected the curtains, spent hours deciding which paintings would bring a sense of comfort, and even experimented with the scents that would greet visitors when they opened the door. Guests often remarked that the place felt less like a rental and more like a home away from home, and that was precisely what Vanessa had intended. For her, this lodge was not simply a source of money. It became her canvas, her way of expressing care and attention to detail. She enjoyed walking through the rooms, making small adjustments, checking if the flowers in the vases looked fresh enough, or if the bedspreads matched the morning sunlight. In those moments, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Yet, as the lodge grew more beautiful and inviting, something else, something invisible but increasingly troubling, began to grow in the background. The rift between Vanessa and Travis, at first barely noticeable, slowly deepened with time. While she became more invested in the family project, Travis seemed to withdraw. He began staying late at work more frequently, coming home tired, distracted, and often in no mood for conversation. At first, Vanessa told herself this was normal. After all, managing a business could be stressful, and she assumed her husband was simply struggling to adjust. She tried to brush off the small things, the odd phone calls at unusual hours, the sudden business trips that appeared out of nowhere, or the way his hands sometimes trembled when she asked him simple questions. But Vanessa had a gift, an intuition sharpened by years of reading people in her real estate career, and by her upbringing in a household where truth was valued above all else. That instinct began whispering to her that something larger was hiding beneath Travis's growing silence. She tried not to listen to it at first, clinging to the hope that her doubts were just a reflection of fatigue. But the uneasy feeling refused to leave. One evening, her eldest daughter Jessica noticed a shift. Vanessa had returned home late after tending to the lodge. She walked in with slumped shoulders, her face shadowed by quiet worry. At dinner that night, Vanessa set down her fork and, almost absent-mindedly, let out a phrase that stuck with Jessica long after. "It seems that someone in my house is not entirely honest." At the time, Jessica dismissed it. She assumed her mother must have been speaking about an employee who hadn't followed instructions, or perhaps a guest who had been less than truthful. But years later, looking back, Jessica realized those words were more than a casual remark. They were a subtle plea, a glimpse of her mother's private burden. Despite these undercurrents of doubt, Vanessa did what she had always done. She held on. She carried an inner strength that allowed her to stay composed even when her heart was heavy. Outwardly, she continued to host guests, smile politely, and keep the lodge running smoothly. Inwardly, however, her friends noticed changes. She laughed less freely than before. Her bright eyes grew tired, faint shadows appeared beneath them, and her posture carried a quiet tension. Those who loved her most said it seemed as though she was always thinking, her mind racing even in moments of silence, as if weighing an important decision she was not yet ready to voice. Still, Vanessa refused to surrender to despair. She believed in steady persistence, in handling problems with patience rather than drama. For her daughter's sake, she would not allow herself to fall apart. She found strength in the thought that the business was blossoming, that Jessica and Andrea were close by, and that life still held possibilities for better days ahead. Her philosophy had always been those storms, no matter how strong, eventually pass, and she tried to embody that belief, even when the storm was inside her own home. In those difficult months, Vanessa's calm exterior was her shield. She preferred conversation to confrontation, compromise to conflict. Vanessa had always been a woman of balance and composure. That was why, even when whispers began to circulate and she herself, according to some sources, discovered troubling hints about her husband's possible unfaithfulness, she did not explode into scandal or accusations. Her character was built on calm reasoning and the belief that direct communication could resolve even the most painful conflicts. Instead of raising her voice or turning her home into a battlefield, she made a different choice: a serious private conversation. It is believed that this discussion may have been the pivotal moment in her marriage. Vanessa, with her usual clarity, is said to have put everything on the line. She presented Travis with an ultimatum, one as firm as it was fair: either recommit to saving the family they had built together or walk away. This was not a threat delivered in anger, but the solemn boundary of a woman who knew her worth and refused to live in half-truths. The morning of February 19th, 2011, began with an uneasy silence for Jessica Freeman. Usually, if her mother didn't answer her phone, she would text, "Busy, call back later." But this time, nothing. No answer, no short reply. Jessica waited another hour, then got in her car and drove to the motel in Saluda where Vanessa was supposed to be the night before. Outside, the February sky was quickly growing dim. The air was dry, as if something had frozen in anticipation. And as she turned the narrow road toward the hotel, her heart sank. Something about the silent building told her that something was wrong. Saluda Mountain Lodge was her mother down to the last detail. Even the welcome sign hanging at the entrance seemed to be an expression of Vanessa herself. Open, friendly, a little old school, but cozy. Jessica stopped the car and walked around the building. The TV was on in the office, but the windows were dark and there were no footsteps or conversations. She called out, "Mom?" But there was only silence in response. The door to the administrative area was unlocked. This immediately alerted her. Vanessa always locked the room, even if she was only going out for a couple of minutes. Inside, everything looked almost normal. Papers on the table, a coffee mug, an unopened bottle of water. But there was one oddity: an open cash register. It contained only small bills, a couple of coins. About $200 were missing. Perhaps there had been a theft. Or had her mother simply not had time to close the cash register? Jessica moved further, deeper into the administrative rooms where the living area was. The door to the bedroom was ajar. Tiptoeing as if in a nightmare, Jessica pushed it. The first thing that caught her eye was the silence. The second was a motionless body on the floor. The mother was lying on her side, not far from the bed. The glass in the clock on the nightstand was broken, and right next to her body was a small shell casing. Jessica did not scream. She froze. At that moment, the inner voice, the one that had previously told her that everything was simply wrong, was already screaming at the top of its lungs. Investigators immediately noted that the shooting was carried out at close range. The weapon was a 12-gauge shotgun. There were no signs of a struggle or signs of forced entry at the scene. No one had entered from the outside. No one had broken down the doors. Everything looked as if whoever did this knew where they were going and who they were waiting for. Nothing was turned upside down in the room. No valuables were missing. Only money from the cash register and that same cartridge case lying there like a business card. When the Polk County Sheriff's Office arrived, the area was already cordoned off. Jessica was sitting on a bench in front of the building, hugging herself. She wasn't crying. She was just staring at a point, as if trying to rewind reality. The first thing the detectives did was question her daughter. Then they began their inspection. It became clear in the first hours. This was not a random crime. The tracks indicated that the criminal knew the layout, knew Vanessa's routine, knew that she would be alone. One of the first questions that the investigators faced was the motive. Money? Too little. Robbery? No signs of forced entry. And then they came across a person who, logically, should have been nearby but wasn't. Her husband, Travis McGraw. His absence immediately raised questions. According to his relatives, he was in the house with his son from his first marriage in the city of Asheville, about 20 kilometers from the scene of the tragedy. However, even these details did not sound convincing, especially considering that the couple had been having a tense relationship in recent months. While Vanessa's body was being sent for forensic examination, the police began to analyze the interior of the lodge. The shell casing was of particular interest. There were no obvious fingerprints on it, but the caliber and type of pellets matched the hunting cartridges that were sold in local gun shops. In itself, this was only circumstantial evidence, but in combination with other details, it began to build a picture. In parallel with the examination of the crime scene, the operatives went to interrogate Travis. He was calm, spoke little, but confidently. According to him, he had no problems with his wife and spent the evening in the house without leaving. However, one phrase, thrown out almost casually, made the investigators wary. He said, "Probably one of the clients. We had strange people there." It would seem a harmless assumption, but there was a strange detail in it. Too quick a transition to the version about a random intruder. It seemed like he knew where to direct suspicion. The first results of the forensic examination confirmed. Death occurred at about 3 to 4 a.m. This meant that the criminal had enough time to escape. The doors and windows were closed, but not locked. Vanessa clearly knew who she let in. The crime had signs of being planned. There was no screaming, no panic, and judging by the testimony of the guests staying in the motel rooms, no one heard anything. This only strengthened the version that the shot was fired from a weapon with a shortened barrel. It is loud, but at close range it can be relatively quiet in a closed room. A day after the tragedy, one of the investigators decided to look through the recordings from the surveillance cameras. But there were none. The motel, despite regular reminders from Vanessa, was still not equipped with a video surveillance system. It seemed like a minor oversight, but in this case it became fatal. The cameras could have recorded who entered the office that night. However, the investigation had another hope. Phones. Modern mobile devices not only save calls and messages, but also record the movements of their owners. Requests were filed to collect call details for Vanessa and Travis. While the requests were being filed, the prosecutor's office began collecting information about the personal life of the deceased. It turned out that Vanessa really did suspect her husband of cheating. A few weeks before the tragedy, she talked about this to a friend. And 2 days before her death, according to unconfirmed reports, Vanessa called a woman named Mary Beth, Travis's alleged lover. This conversation could have been the final turning point. Some of her relatives claim that she gave Travis a choice: stay with her or leave forever. And in this context, her death no longer looked like a tragic accident, but like an attempt to eliminate a person who began to interfere with a new life. 3 days after the body was found, police seized hunting rifles from Travis's garage. One of the shotguns, a Mossberg 500, matched the caliber and barrel type of the gun that fired the shot. An examination showed that the cartridges found in the suspect's car matched the shell casing found at the scene of the tragedy. The evidence began to fall into place. And although there was no direct proof yet, the truth that they were afraid to say out loud was increasingly felt in the air. The killer was one of their own. As the first hours after the discovery of Vanessa Mintz turned into days, the investigation entered the phase where every little detail could change the course of the case. There were no witnesses, no surveillance cameras, no obvious motive that would fit the classic robbery version. But there was a sense that the crime was committed with cold blood and a certain level of calculation. Polk County investigators knew that if they did not start unraveling the matter quickly, it could drag on for years. and the first lead was the victim's husband, Travis McGraw. From the very beginning, Travis did not demonstrate the behavior that was expected of him. He did not show open grief, did not seek contact with the investigation, did not ask questions. For many of Vanessa's loved ones, this was an alarming sign. They knew her, and they knew that she had doubts about her husband's fidelity. Investigators began to collect everything that concerned Travis, from his daily routine to his bank transactions. And it quickly became clear that behind the respectable firefighter's facade, there was a life that was not so perfect. First of all, he was having an affair. A woman named Mary Beth Fisher admitted that their relationship had been going on for several months. They met regularly, corresponded, and, most importantly, Travis assured her that he was over with Vanessa. But there were no signs of a divorce at that time. On the contrary, Vanessa was still running a business, living in the same house, and wearing a wedding ring. The motive began to emerge more clearly. According to the investigation, Vanessa could have presented Travis with an ultimatum, either a family or a new life. If she was going to file for divorce, it could have entailed financial losses. And if she also knew about her husband's affair, she may have threatened to make it public. In a small town where reputation meant a lot, this could have been a serious blow. And suddenly the version of a domestic conflict, behind which lay passion, betrayal, and fear of exposure, became the main one. Meanwhile, the examination of the weapons continued. The hunting shotgun seized from Travis's car turned out to be a key element. The marks on the barrel matched. The cartridges were of the same manufacturer as the cartridge case found at the scene. But this was not enough. Although the weapon matched, it was not registered as personal. Moreover, there was no evidence directly linking Travis to the moment of the shot. The investigation was working blind. They needed either an eyewitness or an electronic trace. Investigators requested data on Travis's cellular activity on the night of the crime. The answer came a few days later. He claimed that he was at home in Asheville. However, an analysis of the cell phone activity showed that his device was moving. Between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., a signal was recorded in the area of the motel. This refuted his alibi. Moreover, at the same time, the device turned off and then turned on in the morning near his house. It seemed that he deliberately turned off the phone so as not to leave a digital trace. But even this did not guarantee an indictment. After all, anyone could have a mobile phone. There were no photos, videos, or witnesses confirming his physical presence at the motel. At the same time, Mary Beth's testimony strengthened the case. She admitted that a few days before the murder, Travis told her a phrase that now sounded like a death sentence. "Everything will change soon. I just need a little time." The investigation also found out that Travis was actively interested in selling weapons. A week before the tragedy, he visited a shooting range, consulted at a gun store, and purchased ammunition, which later turned out to be identical to that used in the attack. Store employees recalled that he behaved nervously, talked about hunting, but asked strange questions regarding the accuracy of a shot at close range. In parallel with the technical evidence, the investigation delved into the suspect's psychological profile. According to his former colleagues, Travis was withdrawn, not given to openness, but had a penchant for control. In relationships, he sought to dominate, patiently waiting before making decisions. He was not impulsive, and this is what made him dangerous. He could carefully plan a crime, calculating every detail. The investigation began looking for evidence of preparation. A weekly to-do list was found in Travis's house. Among the routine entries, "drop off son," "pay bills," were two phrases, "night trip" and "pick up from garage." No one knew what exactly he was planning to pick up, but one of the supermarket surveillance cameras recorded his car around 1:30 a.m. on February 19th. This put him in close proximity to the crime. Investigators began questioning his son from his first marriage, with whom Travis said he spent the night. The teenager admitted that he went to bed around 10 p.m. and did not remember his father being home the entire time. He woke up at 6 a.m., and Travis was already home. This created a window of almost 7 hours during which he could have left the house, driven to Saluda, committed the crime, and returned. Each new detail only strengthened the suspicion, but legally the investigation remained on shaky ground. More was needed. And then fate threw the investigation an unexpected find. One of Travis's colleagues said that he kept an old laptop in the garage. According to the witness, he often took notes on it, even storing copies of personal messages. During the search, the laptop was confiscated, and among the deleted files, emails were found in which Travis discussed his dissatisfaction in his marriage with a friend. Some phrases sounded ominous. "She's dragging me down. Sometimes I think how much easier it would be to live without her." Perhaps these were just emotional statements, but in combination with the facts, it looked like a confession. By the end of the second week of the investigation, the investigators had motive, unwillingness to get divorced and divide property, new woman. Circumstantial evidence, gun, shell casing, ammunition, behavior, false alibi, phone data, camera footage, witness statements, Mary Beth, co-workers, digital traces, recordings, letters, roots. That was enough. In March 2011, a month after the tragedy, Travis McGraw was arrested on suspicion of murdering Vanessa Mintz. When officers approached him, he did not resist. He just lowered his eyes, as if he had known all along that he would be found. While he sat in a pretrial detention cell, the prosecutor's office prepared for the case. Meanwhile, Vanessa's family tried to understand. How could a person she trusted do this to her? The hardest part is not the loss itself. The hardest part is realizing that the threat was so close, that the love she held dear had turned into betrayal, and the man she was building a future with might have been planning her end. Travis McGraw's trial began in February 2013, 2 years after the tragic death of Vanessa Mintz. For her family, those 2 years were a time of pain, waiting, and trying to find answers in the silence left by her passing. For the prosecution, it was a period of painstaking work. Evidence was collected bit by bit, logical chains were built, witnesses were selected. The prosecution understood that they were facing a difficult trial. A murder without direct witnesses, without a clear DNA trace or fingerprints, which means that everything will be based on a combination of evidence, and each of them must be absolutely convincing. On the very first day of the trial, the attention of the courtroom was drawn to the accused himself. Travis McGraw sat in a dark suit with an expression of restraint on his face. He did not look broken, did not give the impression of a cruel criminal. His appearance worked for the defense. A decent father, a firefighter, a man with a stable past. The defense lawyers skillfully used this. In their opening statement, they said, "This man is not a criminal. He is a father. He is a friend. He served his community. He is being charged on circumstantial evidence and inference. We are here to show that it is not enough to ruin someone's life." But the prosecution was prepared. The prosecution, having worked through every aspect of the case, began with Vanessa herself, so that the jury would understand not only who she was, but also how her relationship with Travis developed. Her letters to a friend were read, as well as her notes in her diary, in which Vanessa expressed suspicions about her husband. One of them read, "He has become a stranger. I feel like he is hiding something. Sometimes I think he is just waiting for the moment to disappear." These words became the emotional backdrop of the entire trial. Then the prosecution began to build a chain of facts. First, the motive. Mary Beth Fisher, Travis's mistress, testified. She described how he had lied about his marriage, assured her it was almost over, promised to be free soon. The prosecutor asked, "Did he ever mention how he was going to end his relationship with Vanessa?" Mary Beth hesitated, but answered, "He said there were ways, that things could be worked out. I didn't take that literally." Then, no. That answer left the jury to draw their own conclusions. It wasn't a direct admission, but it added to the sense of menace. Then came the alibi. The prosecution presented an analysis of Travis's cell phone data. A slide was shown, a map showing the coordinates of his signal. At 1 a.m., his home in Asheville. At 2:40 a.m., the area of a motel in Saluda. Then silence. And at 6:15 a.m., the signal returned in the area of his home. The investigator explained, "The phone was turned off for a critical period of time. We can't say for sure that he was in the car, but that's when the murder occurred. That suggests that Travis was trying to hide his movements." The defense countered with its own version. Anyone could have had the phone. Travis had no reason to drive to another city at night. No camera or witness saw him at the scene. You're relying on interpretation, not facts. Their strategy was clear. Raise doubt. Not refute every piece of evidence, but sow uncertainty about its reliability. But the prosecution pressed on. They called an employee of the gun store where Travis had purchased his ammunition. He confirmed that the rounds were the same type as those found at the motel. Was he interested in hunting? The prosecutor asked. What did he say? The clerk replied, he talked about shooting at short range. That surprised me because that's usually the kind of question a newbie asks. But he seemed confident. Next came a ballistics expert. He compared the shell casing found at the crime scene with the rounds from Travis's gun. The result? A high degree of match. A magnified image of the marks on the brass surface was shown on the courtroom screen. The expert explained, "They're like fingerprints. It's almost a perfect match." It was a strong point for the prosecution. Although not 100% proof, it was a convincing touch in the overall picture. An important step was the testimony of Travis's son. The teenager, who was 13 at the time of the tragedy, said he went to bed around 10 p.m. and did not remember his father being home that night. "I woke up in the morning and he was downstairs making breakfast," he said. The prosecutor clarified, "Did you hear him leaving or coming back?" "No, I just don't know if he was home the whole time." This uncertainty worked against the defense. Travis's alibi was not confirmed. The defense continued to insist. All the evidence is circumstantial. You didn't see him shoot. There are no fingerprints, no blood on his clothes, no DNA. All you have is maybes and possibly, and that's not enough to deprive a man of his freedom. They emphasized Travis's reputation, bringing in his former colleagues who described him as a level-headed, hard-working, and devoted father. He saved lives. "And you want to portray him as a cold-blooded killer?" the lawyer said in his closing statement. But the prosecutor had the final word. He spoke calmly, without pathos. Murderers rarely leave an autograph at the crime scene, especially those who plan their crime. But we have assembled a chain, motive, betrayal and fear of losing money, preparation, buying a gun, trying to create an alibi, execution, driving at night, a disconnected phone, a shell casing that matched his bullets. He was there. He did it. He took the life of a woman who trusted him. This is not speculation. This is the truth. The jury retired to consider their verdict. Vanessa's family held their breath. Several hours passed. Then they returned to the courtroom. The judge asked, "What is your verdict?" "Guilty." First-degree murder. The silence in the courtroom was ringing. Someone from Vanessa's family sobbed. Travis showed no emotion. He only shook his head slightly, as if agreeing with the verdict. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without parole. On a lonely stretch of road just past midnight, a passing motorist spotted something unusual. A car had swerved off course and come to rest in a roadside ditch. From within the vehicle, faint but unmistakable flames flickered in the darkness. Alarmed, the driver slowed his car, pulled over to the shoulder, and quickly reached for his phone. Within moments, he was on the line with 911, urgently describing the fire and its location. Emergency responders wasted no time. Dispatchers logged the call immediately and sent fire crews racing toward the scene. Slowly, the flames were brought under control until only smoldering remnants remained. When the fire was finally subdued, investigators began their grim task of examining the wreckage. The discovery was sobering. In the backseat of the charred vehicle, they found a victim. The revelation shifted the operation from fire suppression to a full-fledged investigation. By the afternoon of that same day, the victim's identity was confirmed. Through fingerprint analysis, forensic specialists were able to make a match. The individual inside the burned car was identified as Mercedes Vega. Dear viewers, thank you for choosing our video and our channel. We put a lot of effort into making sure you enjoy being with us. Mercedes Vega came into the world on March 10, 2001, in Anchorage, Alaska. Her arrival marked the beginning of a life that would be remembered for its vibrancy and light. Even in her earliest years, there was something about Mercedes that drew people toward her. She had an unspoken energy, a spark that made others want to be near her. As a little girl, she developed a love for horses, spending hours talking about them, sketching them in notebooks, and dreaming of one day riding across wide-open fields. She also had a soft spot for babies, often stepping in to help her mother or neighbors whenever there was a toddler who needed an extra set of hands. It wasn't just about caretaking. It was the joy she felt when she could make someone else smile. That joy was simple, pure, and carried with her through life. In 2007, when Mercedes was just 6 years old, her mother, Erica, entered into a relationship with a man named Tom Pillsbury. At first, Mercedes was cautious, as many children are when a new figure steps into their world. But over time, Tom became more than just her mother's partner. He became a central figure in her life. Their relationship blossomed slowly and naturally. By 2010, right before Erica and Tom's wedding, Mercedes decided to give Tom a special Father's Day card. In her carefully written handwriting, she penned the words, "I love that you're marrying my mom." Tom kept that card, not because of the paper itself, but because of what it symbolized, a bond built on trust, warmth, and genuine love. For him, it was proof that Mercedes had accepted him into her heart as family. As she grew, Mercedes pursued her passions with both curiosity and discipline. She took violin lessons, practicing diligently until her music began to fill the family home with rich melodies. Alongside her violin, she discovered her singing voice. It was not only strong but soulful, a voice that carried emotion and left audiences moved. She became confident enough to sing publicly, even performing the national anthem at sports games and local ceremonies. These performances weren't just about showcasing talent. They were a way for Mercedes to connect with her community and share a piece of herself with others. Academically, Mercedes excelled. Schoolwork came naturally to her. Teachers often described her as intelligent, focused, and eager to learn. She consistently earned straight A's, proof of both her natural ability and her determination to succeed. Her ambitions weren't limited to classrooms and books. She also became a strong swimmer, developing an almost spiritual connection to water. Mercedes would often say she felt her soul belonged in Hawaii, a place where the ocean could embrace her completely. The sea reflected her nature, vast, free, and endlessly alive. Her home life in Santan Valley, Arizona, shaped much of who she became. Erica and Tom created a nurturing environment that allowed Mercedes to grow with both confidence and humility. Erica often described her daughter as witty and articulate, someone who could make friends with ease but also knew how to stand her ground. Mercedes had a playful side, too. She was a prankster who enjoyed laughter as much as she enjoyed serious conversations. Her laugh was unforgettable, the kind of laugh that filled a room and made everyone else laugh along, even if they didn't know the joke. She carried with her an unshakable authenticity, never apologizing for who she was, and in doing so, she gave others permission to be themselves too. By her early 20s, Mercedes stepped into adulthood with independence and determination. She moved to Tempe, Arizona, settling into the Aubrey Apartments. There, she began carving out a life on her own terms. To support herself, She took a job as a dancer at a Phoenix club, working several nights a week. For Mercedes, the work was a means to an end. She had bigger dreams, dreams of opening her own gym and becoming a personal trainer. She was passionate about fitness, not only for herself, but for how it could empower others. Her goal was clear. She wanted to help people become stronger, both physically and mentally. But life also tested her resilience. In October of 2020, Mercedes experienced a terrifying moment when she was the victim of an armed robbery outside her Phoenix apartment. The event left her deeply shaken, but it did not break her. Instead, she chose to move to Tempe for a fresh start, hoping to leave behind the shadows of that night. When police investigated, Mercedes did everything she could to help. She identified a suspect in a lineup and gave a detailed victim's impact statement. It was not easy to relive the experience, but she showed extraordinary strength. To her, surviving meant not allowing fear to dictate her future. That choice, that resilience, spoke volumes about who she was. As we approach the turning point of her story, we arrive at a Sunday in April of 2023. At first glance, it was an ordinary day, no different than many others. It was April 16th, and Mercedes, then 22 years old, was living her life in Tempe. She had casual plans with friends for dinner, a simple outing she looked forward to after her work shifts. But later that afternoon, she sent out a message letting them know she needed to adjust her schedule. Instead of dinner, she would head to the club where she worked. At the time, it was just a routine change, nothing unusual or alarming. Yet, looking back, it became a significant marker. The final known communication from her. Later that evening, surveillance footage from the Aubrey apartments would capture fragments of her last moments in familiar surroundings. Around 8:45 p.m., a white 2018 Chevrolet Malibu with a salvage title appeared in the parking garage. The car didn't belong to Mercedes, and its presence raised questions. The vehicle lingered in the area, though the footage of its movements has not been publicly released. Then, at approximately 9:15 p.m., Mercedes herself came into view. In the footage shared by authorities, she can be seen walking toward her own vehicle in her assigned parking spot. She moved with confidence, the way someone does when wrapping up another normal day. She could not have known it, but that moment, recorded on a silent camera, would be the last public glimpse of her life as it was. Evidence recovered later from the scene began to tell a story, one pieced together slowly through careful analysis. Investigators noted subtle yet significant signs suggesting that a struggle had occurred right there in the parking area of Mercedes Vega's complex. Traces of her DNA were discovered both at her assigned parking spot and within the passenger area of her car. These details indicated that something sudden and forceful had interrupted her evening routine, an event that forced her out of the ordinary flow of life and into a situation far beyond her control. Minutes ticked forward, and the sequence of movements became clearer through surrounding surveillance cameras. At around 9:25 p.m., Mercedes's own vehicle was captured pulling into a nearby lot close to a popular restaurant called Culinary Dropout, just a short distance from her apartment building. The way the car was parked immediately drew attention when it was later reviewed. It had been left awkwardly, violating local parking rules, with the key still sitting inside the ignition. This odd detail suggested not a normal stop, but one marked by haste or abandonment, perhaps under pressure. The second vehicle, the white 2018 Chevrolet Malibu first seen in the apartment garage, was also captured in footage. It was spotted leaving the same general area shortly after Mercedes's car was abandoned, heading off into the night without attracting notice at the time. To those reconstructing the case, this pattern appeared deliberate, almost as if the vehicles had been maneuvered in tandem and then separated, leaving Mercedes' car behind while the Malibu continued west. As the night deepened and the city quieted into early Monday morning, the situation escalated far from the streets of Tempe. Out along Interstate 10 near Tonopah, a stretch of desert landscape about 60 miles west of the city, the setting turned stark. It is a place where the freeway cuts through wide open land, traffic thins, and silence hangs heavy. Around this remote stretch, after midnight, a passing driver noticed something unusual. A vehicle had veered into a roadside ditch, and from within, flickering flames were visible. Concerned, the man slowed, pulled over, and quickly dialed 911 to report what he was seeing. His call would become one of the earliest first-hand accounts of the discovery and would later be preserved in the official investigative record. During the call, the man's words painted a picture of the moment. He told the dispatcher, "I just want to report a car. It's on fire. It's on the north side of the westbound lanes on Interstate 10, about the 85.5-mile marker. It was like down in the bushes, but I saw a flame inside the vehicle." The detail of his observation was striking. He also added something that stood out to detectives reviewing the audio later. "You said there's people outside the vehicle? I believe I saw at least one person outside." "Yes." This remark hinted at the possibility of activity near the vehicle either just before or during the time the flames took hold. Whether accurate or not, it added an element of urgency, raising questions about what had unfolded in those desert moments. Emergency dispatchers quickly logged the call and dispatched fire crews to the site. Responders arrived to find the Chevrolet Malibu engulfed in flames, burning in the dark expanse of the desert night. Firefighters worked methodically to suppress the blaze, and once the flames were under control, they began their inspection of the charred vehicle. Inside the back seat, they made a sobering discovery. A person was present. The condition of the car itself offered investigators a series of important clues. In the front area, 2 bottles of household bleach were found. One bottle was partially empty, and alongside it sat a container of lighter fluid. Latex gloves were also collected at the scene, suggesting that the setup was not accidental but carried signs of deliberate staging. The car's status added to the intrigue. It had not been reported stolen, and its salvage title history meant tracing its origins required additional paperwork and cross-checking through state databases. Authorities quickly secured the surrounding area, treating the ditch and roadside shoulder as a crime scene. Barriers were placed to keep the public out while forensic specialists moved in to preserve what remained of potential evidence. The fire had destroyed much, but not everything. By later that same day, the identity of the victim was confirmed. Using fingerprint analysis, investigators were able to link the person found in the Malibu back to Tempe. It was Mercedes Vega. For her family, friends, and community, the news was devastating. For investigators, it meant the case now connected back to the surveillance trail that had begun at her apartment complex just hours earlier. Detectives from the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office assumed coordination of the case, bringing in additional resources and reviewing every available piece of evidence. They replayed the 911 call, listening closely for tone, background noise, or overlooked details. They also re-interviewed the driver who had reported the fire, carefully mapping his vantage point from the freeway, how long he had observed the scene, and the exact timing of his call. The timeline began to take shape with painstaking precision. At one end was the garage footage in Tempe, showing both Mercedes' car and the Malibu leaving in sequence. Then came the abandoned car near Culinary Dropout with keys left in place, an act suggesting either panic or intentional misdirection. Finally, the chain of events reached its tragic end in the desert ditch, where the Malibu was found burning. The discovery site itself painted a stark and unsettling picture. The Malibu sat at an awkward angle in the ditch, its frame blackened from the flames. The back seat bore the heaviest damage, while the front contained the bleach bottles and lighter fluid container, evidence that strongly indicated the use of accelerants. Forensic teams collected the gloves, checked the containers, and began to process the ashes and debris for anything that could survive fire. Fingerprints, DNA traces, or chemical residues. Traffic cameras along the interstate were also pulled into the investigation. Analysts combed through hours of footage, frame by frame, to determine whether the Malibu's westward journey had been captured at any point. Even small details such as the car's speed, lane changes, or timing compared to other vehicles could prove vital in narrowing the window of events. The car, once cooled and secured, was transported to a forensic lot for a more detailed examination. Specialists used advanced tools to recover as much physical evidence as possible, despite the damage caused by heat and flames. The report that someone had been seen near Mercedes was enough to trigger an immediate search through the surrounding scrub and gravel. Officers spread out with flashlights and K9 units, hoping to find footprints, cigarette butts, or any discarded personal effects. Yet the land around Tempe was unforgiving. Hard-packed earth broken up by scattered rocks and thorny shrubs. Such terrain left investigators with almost nothing in the way of visible impressions, making it difficult to follow any trail. Still, they documented every patch of disturbed soil and bagged even the smallest items in hopes that one might later provide a lead. Alongside these ground searches, detectives subpoenaed Mercedes' cell phone records to reconstruct her final movements, looking for that last signal ping that might anchor her location in time. At the same time, her car's interior was examined down to the smallest detail, from seat fibers to smudges on the windows. That evening, as the investigation intensified, the Pillsbury family's world was about to collapse. Around 7 p.m., Mercedes' parents, Erica and Tom, had just returned home from a Caribbean vacation, still sun-touched and relaxed, unaware of the storm that awaited them. A knock at the front door changed everything. 2 uniformed officers stood on the porch, their expressions somber. They asked if Mercedes lived there, and when Erica confirmed, her voice uneasy, she pressed them for reassurance. "Is she all right?" she repeated more than once. The hesitation in their reply told her the answer before the words came. Her daughter was gone. Erica later described the moment as one where her very soul felt ripped from her body. For Tom, the memory of that night became equally seared into his mind. A shocking fracture in what had been an ordinary day only hours before. Their last phone call with Mercedes, cheerful and routine while they were still away, now seemed like a final gift they hadn't known to treasure. Despite the crushing grief, Erica and Tom found themselves thrust into the role of witnesses. They gathered themselves enough to share every detail they could remember about Mercedes' routines, her habits, and even small quirks. Anything that might help investigators sketch out what drew her from the safety of her apartment garage that evening. Detectives from the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office understood that the case was unusual from the start. Mercedes hadn't simply disappeared into thin air. She had vanished from what should have been a secure location and was later found in a burned-out vehicle roughly 60 miles from her home. That distance alone raised difficult questions. Why was she taken there, and who could have orchestrated such a move without drawing attention along the way? The months that followed tested the endurance of everyone connected to the case. What began with urgency eventually slowed to the painstaking rhythm of forensic work. Specialists examined the charred shell of Mercedes Malibu, collecting even the smallest particles. They sifted through ash by hand, hoping to recover fingerprints, DNA, or overlooked personal belongings. Each fragment was cataloged, though progress felt agonizingly slow. Detectives knew that answers might be buried within the ruins, but it could take months before lab results revealed anything of substance. The official autopsy report, conducted by the Maricopa County Medical Examiner, was not released until October 20th to 23rd, 6 months after Mercedes was found. That delay in formal findings weighed heavily on her family and frustrated the broader community following the case. For more than a year, public updates were sparse, leaving friends, co-workers, and supporters in suspense. While the sheriff's office reassured the public that work was ongoing, many quietly feared the case might slip into stagnation. Investigators circled back to the people who knew Mercedes best, carefully mapping out her daily patterns. Her parents emphasized her independence, her love for her job, and the absence of obvious conflicts. But they also reminded detectives of an earlier ordeal that had cast a long shadow over her life. It was impossible, they said, to ignore the armed robbery in Phoenix back in 2020. That event had been more than a scare. It was the catalyst that had driven her to relocate to Tempe in search of safety. On October 12, 2020, at about 5 a.m., Mercedes had been returning to her Phoenix apartment when a man confronted her outside the building. He demanded her belongings and fled with cash and personal items. Though she was not physically harmed, the psychological impact lingered. Mercedes cooperated fully with the police, viewing a lineup and identifying a suspect named Cujo Young. She later gave a victim impact statement, explaining how the robbery had upended her sense of security. What followed was a grueling legal process that dragged out over years. Young faced charges of armed robbery with a deadly weapon, but his case stalled through no fewer than 18 continuances. Attorneys came and went. Plea negotiations were accepted and rejected, and the legal clock stretched endlessly. Each reset meant Mercedes had to prepare herself again for the possibility of testifying in court. By early 2023, her trial date was set for April 17th. Records show she was expected to testify against Young, possibly the very day her body was discovered, though some accounts suggest it may have been scheduled the day prior to her disappearance. The timing was striking, and it could not be ignored. Family members wondered aloud whether her upcoming testimony had placed her in jeopardy. Erica, in particular, voiced her deep frustration in media interviews, believing that the motive for Mercedes' death was rooted in silencing her before she could take the stand. For his part, Sergeant Joaquin Enriquez publicly maintained that his unit treated every investigation with impartiality, regardless of a victim's profession or background. He pushed back against any suggestion that the case was lagging because Mercedes had worked at a club, emphasizing that all victims were afforded the same seriousness. Still, whispers of bias persisted, leaving the family with lingering doubt about whether urgency had been compromised. Friends and colleagues at the club described Mercedes as dependable, friendly, and mindful of safety, especially after her 2020 trauma. They recalled how she had been cautious, often checking her surroundings and sharing her plans with close friends. On the night she disappeared, she had agreed to cover a last-minute shift. No one remembered her mentioning any arguments, threats, or unusual encounters. That absence of immediate red flags pointed investigators back again to the looming court date and the long history tied to her previous case. During those crucial hours in April 20th to 23rd, when Mercedes was abducted and later found deceased, records showed that Cujo Young was not physically located at either scene. He was still out of custody, moving through the labyrinth of his pending trial, but there was no confirmed evidence placing him in Tempe or Tonopah. The possibility remained, however, that someone connected to him might have acted in his interest. Random theories of opportunity-driven faded in the face of what increasingly looked like a calculated setup. As time passed, the family clung to the belief that answers would come. They insisted that Mercedes' tragedy was not random, but rooted in her bravery as a victim willing to speak against someone who had once threatened her. For Erica and Tom, that conviction became the driving force behind their public advocacy. As the investigative threads drew tighter, weaving together strands of digital forensics, fingerprint databases, and cell phone analysis, the long silent puzzle surrounding Mercedes' death began to give way. Detectives from the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, who had spent months painstakingly tracing leads, finally reached the point of action. What followed was a series of arrests that transformed speculation into concrete charges and, for the first time, put names and faces to the shadows investigators had been pursuing. The first breakthrough arrived on November 11, 2024, when law enforcement in Tennessee detained Sincere Hayes, a 22-year-old from Chattanooga. At the time of his connection to Mercedes' case, Hayes was already in custody in Hamilton County on unrelated local matters. What tied him unmistakably to the crime was a fingerprint match, one lifted from a simple but telling object, a plastic grocery bag found abandoned in the back of Mercedes' burned-out car. That print had sat in evidence databases for more than a year, waiting for a match, until Hayes' arrest in May 2024 finally added his biometrics to the system. The discovery electrified the case and gave detectives their first tangible suspect. Within weeks, Hayes was extradited to Arizona to face the charges formally. During his initial appearance in court, he entered a not guilty plea, standing before the judge with what reporters described as a steady and controlled demeanor. The court set his bond at $2 million, cash only, underscoring the severity of the accusations. Under questioning, Hayes admitted to knowing Cujo Young, a name already steeped in the case's history, explaining that their connection stemmed from both men's roots in Chattanooga. He further acknowledged traveling to Arizona, referring to it vaguely as business. Though he refused to elaborate on what that business entailed, with whom it involved, or why it coincided with Mercedes's disappearance. Investigators also combed through Hayes' background, which revealed a pattern of run-ins with the law dating back to age 18. His adult criminal record began in May 2021, when he was arrested in DeKalb County, Alabama, for possession of a stolen firearm. That charge resulted in an indictment the following February. His troubles did not stop there. In May 2024, Chattanooga police responded to a shots-fired call and found Hayes in possession of multiple weapons, one confirmed stolen. He was released on a $5,000 bond, only to be arrested again weeks later by the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office for a string of traffic and weapons violations, including DUI, speeding, and possession of a firearm while intoxicated. Each case painted a picture of a young man who lived on the margins of legality, escalating toward more serious consequences. The net widened further in June 20th to 25th. Detectives arrested Jared Gray, a 25-year-old also hailing from Tennessee, this time in Catoosa County, Georgia. Gray, like Hayes, was drawn into the case through forensic science. His fingerprints surfaced on a plastic cup discovered inside the burned remains of Mercedes's Chevrolet Malibu. When confronted with the evidence, Gray initially denied any connection to Hayes or Young. He admitted to being in Arizona around that time, again citing vague business, but claimed he had acted alone. Yet travel records dismantled his version of events. Investigators produced airline documents showing that he and Hayes had flown together from Tennessee to Phoenix on March 3, 2023. Even more damning, bus records placed both men on a Greyhound returning east on April 18th, the day after Mercedes's car was set ablaze. Though Gray's background did not reveal the same depth of prior convictions as Hayes's, the forensic links tied him directly to the crime scene. DNA traces matched items from the Malibu, and his cell phone data mapped eerily similar paths to the car's final journey. He, too, awaited extradition to Arizona, where prosecutors argued for a $2 million cash-only bond. His defense offered no immediate explanation for the forensic evidence, leaving his denials increasingly hollow. The chain of accountability closed even further on July 24, 2025, when a Maricopa County grand jury indicted 29-year-old Cudjoe Young, long suspected of being at the center of the storm. At the time, Young was already in custody on an unrelated warrant. His court appearance days later drew significant attention, as he declared to the judge that he would represent himself in trial proceedings. When cautioned that he would be held to the same standards as a licensed attorney, Young responded simply, "Yes, sir." He too entered a plea of not guilty, and his bond was set at $2 million, cash only. Young's name carried particular weight in the case. He was the same individual Mercedes had bravely identified in the 2020 armed robbery that had forced her to uproot her life and move to Tempe. That robbery, which she had hoped to see prosecuted in court, now loomed as a chilling prelude to the events of April 20th to 23rd. Each of the three men faced an array of serious charges. For Hayes, prosecutors filed for first-degree murder and signaled their intent to pursue the death penalty, citing aggravating circumstances. The calculated cruelty of the crime and the motive of silencing a key witness in an upcoming trial. Gray faced multiple counts, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, armed robbery, and theft. Young, though not linked by fingerprints or DNA, stood accused as the architect of the conspiracy. The emerging narrative suggested that the motive centered on silencing Mercedes before she could testify. Prosecutors argued that Young orchestrated the scheme, leveraging his ties to Hayes and Gray to ensure the threat against him in court disappeared. Court records revealed a trail. Young had authorized the credit card used to purchase Hayes's and Gray's plane tickets, arranged for the Malibu to be retrieved under an alias, and placed calls directing associates to collect a package near the burn site on the very night the car was destroyed. For the Vegas family, these revelations were both validating and devastating. They confirmed what Erica had long feared, that her daughter's death was not random but tied to her courage in standing up against intimidation years earlier. Yet they also underscored the depth of planning that had gone into the crime, a conspiracy stretching across states and involving multiple players. By late 20 to 25, Hayes's case was advancing, though slowly. After his initial not guilty plea and extradition, prosecutors formally filed notice in May 2025 of their intent to seek the death penalty. The legal process, bound by motions, discovery, and constitutional safeguards, promised to be lengthy. Hayes's defense team responded with determination during a series of status conferences, repeatedly challenging the prosecution's decision to pursue the death penalty. His attorneys argued that the state was overreaching, especially when, in their view, the most prominent forensic tie, the fingerprint on the grocery bag recovered from the burned-out Malibu, was circumstantial rather than definitive proof of direct involvement. They suggested that such evidence could have been left behind innocently, prior to any alleged crime, or even mishandled during the lengthy span between its collection and eventual database match. These motions and counterarguments underscored the high-stakes atmosphere in the courtroom, where each side fought to frame the narrative of what the evidence truly meant. A tentative trial date had originally been placed on the calendar for July 31, 2025, but as is often the case in complex homicide proceedings, the schedule shifted. Court records confirmed that the date was postponed, citing ongoing discovery, pretrial motions, and the volume of forensic analysis still being contested. Instead, the next major status hearing was set for later in the year. While delays frustrated many, particularly Mercedes' family, legal experts reminded observers that such postponements were typical in capital cases, where the stakes demanded thorough preparation on both sides. Meanwhile, Jared Gray's path through the justice system lagged even further behind. Following his arrest in Georgia in June 2025, he remained held on a $2 million bond, awaiting extradition to Arizona. In response, Gray's defense filed motions in his Georgia hearings, signaling their intention to contest both points. His attorneys also emphasized his limited criminal history, portraying him not as a ringleader but as someone who might have been peripherally caught up in the actions of others. For prosecutors, however, the broader picture carried greater weight than any one piece of evidence. They argued that Gray's connection to Hayes, combined with the matching travel records and cell phone data, placed him firmly in the conspiracy. As of now, all three accused men, Cudjoe Young, Sincere Hayes, and Jared Gray, remain firmly within the grip of the judicial system. At approximately 8 a.m., one of the workers, while going about his routine duties, noticed something unusual lying a short distance from the road. It was a red-orange suitcase, its vibrant color starkly contrasting with the muted tones of the natural surroundings. Unlike the items often discarded in such places, this suitcase appeared oddly intact and out of place. As he unzipped it, a powerful and revolting stench emanated from within. The foul odor was unmistakably the smell of decomposition, and the worker quickly realized that the contents of the suitcase were far graver than he had anticipated. The police arrived at the scene promptly, prepared to examine the chilling discovery. Upon inspection, they confirmed the grim truth. Inside the suitcase was the lifeless body of a young woman, Valerie Reyes. Her legs, specifically her knees and ankles, were bound together, and her wrists had been tied with tape. Most disturbingly, her mouth and chin were wrapped in multiple layers of duct tape and suggesting a deeply sinister intent behind her tragic demise. This is a true and shocking story that took place in New Rochelle, New York. It's about a young woman named Valerie Reyes, who was born on April 1, 1994, in the quiet town of New Rochelle, New York. Born to loving parents, Sal and Norma, she was the second child in a family of 4. She had one older brother and 2 younger brothers, and as the only daughter, Valerie held a special place in the family. Her close bond with her mother was evident from an early age, as Norma nurtured Valerie's innate passion for all things artistic. Creativity coursed through Valerie's veins, and her artistic flair became apparent in everything she touched, whether it was sketching vibrant images, decorating her room, or crafting thoughtful gifts for friends and family. Valerie was a gentle soul, exuding compassion, kindness, and selflessness in abundance. From her earliest years, Valerie displayed a penchant for home life and simplicity. Unlike many of her peers who gravitated to parties, she found solace and joy in quieter pursuits. Her love for books was unshakable. She spent hours lost in the pages of novels spanning every genre, from classic literature to contemporary thrillers. Family and close friends were the core of her world, and she prioritized spending time with them over anything else. After graduating high school in 2012, Valerie took her first steps toward independence by enrolling at New Rochelle College. College life opened new doors for her, introducing her to a broader social circle and allowing her to forge meaningful connections. Friends and acquaintances described her as an effervescent, someone who radiated genuine warmth and kindness. Sundays remained sacred to the Reyes family, a day they all looked forward to with eager anticipation. These family days were filled with laughter, camaraderie, and the simple joys. Board games, nature walks, and visits to quaint local cafes became cherished rituals that Valerie wholeheartedly embraced. Even as she grew older, she maintained a playful, mischievous side, particularly when spending time with her younger siblings who adored her. Balancing her academic responsibilities, Valerie took up a part-time job at a bookstore located in a bustling shopping mall in East Chester. This job was more than just a source of income for her. It was a perfect outlet for her literary interests. She thrived in the environment, recommending books to customers and discussing the nuances of different genres. Her passion for reading was so deep that she was often seen with a book in hand, even during her leisure moments at cafes. Beyond her love for books, Valerie had a wide array of hobbies that reflected her multifaceted personality. She enjoyed singing in her cozy apartment, taking long walks through scenic routes, and embarking on adventurous hiking trips. However, art remained her truest passion. Valerie had a unique talent as a portraitist, reflecting the characters of her friends and classmates in her drawings. This love for art gradually extended to an interest in tattoo design, inspired by her older brother, who was already a skilled tattoo artist. Valerie dreamed of one day owning her own tattoo parlor, a place where she could bring her artistic visions to life. She was tireless in her pursuit of this goal, practicing her craft diligently and immersing herself in the world of tattoo artistry. Her dream was not merely about creating tattoos, but about using her artistry to help people express their own identities. Despite her positive outlook on life, Valerie was not without her struggles. She often grappled with anxiety and bouts of depression, challenges that sometimes cast a shadow over her otherwise vibrant personality. In January 2018, Valerie's life took an unexpected turn when she met a man named Javier through a dating website. Their relationship began on a promising note but quickly unraveled. Over the course of their 3-month romance, it became evident to Valerie that Javier's feelings for her were more intense than hers for him. She confided in her friends that she saw no future in the relationship, describing it as a brief chapter rather than a meaningful connection. As tensions grew, Valerie made the difficult decision to end things in April 2018. However, Javier struggled to accept the breakup, persistently calling and messaging her in an attempt to rekindle their relationship. His unwillingness to let go created a lingering tension that Valerie found increasingly draining. In September 2018, several months after their breakup, Javier contacted Valerie again, claiming he needed to reimburse her for a charge he had inadvertently made on her debit card. According to him, he had mistakenly used her card information for an online purchase and wanted to return the money. The details of how this happened remained unclear. Whether Valerie had knowingly provided him with the card information or it had been saved from their time together. Regardless, Valerie's patience with Javier had worn thin by this point. She planned to involve a friend to handle the financial matter, hoping to minimize any further interaction with her ex-boyfriend. This incident marked a turning point, as Javier appeared to finally grasp that their relationship was irreparably over. For a few months, his attempts to contact her ceased, giving Valerie some much-needed respite. By the time Valerie turned 24, she was living alone in a modest basement apartment in New Rochelle. Given her previous psychological states, living in solitude did not boost her self-confidence. Panic attacks and anxiety began to return more frequently. The girl had been living alone for quite some time, yet in recent weeks, she had been gripped by growing unease and paranoia. a sense of vulnerability heightened by the absence of loved ones nearby. Valerie had always been a deeply empathetic and sensitive person, and these feelings seemed to intensify when she was by herself for extended periods. The day before, on Sunday, she had spent a joyous day with her family. Laughter echoed through their home, and everything seemed perfect. At least that's how it appeared to everyone around her. But on Monday, January 28th, 2019, something changed. Valerie called her mother in a state of panic. Her voice trembled with fear as she confessed a chilling premonition. She felt as though her life was about to end, that she was going to die. Her words were haunting, filled with a dread that seemed inexplicable yet deeply real to her. Norma, her mother, was stunned. Hearing such a statement from her daughter pierced her heart with worry and disbelief. Valerie's tone carried an urgency, a conviction that was impossible to dismiss. It was as though she could see or sense something no one else could. This sudden shift in her thoughts and demeanor was not entirely out of nowhere. Norma knew her daughter had been through a difficult breakup just 5 days earlier. It was clear that Valerie was deeply affected by recent events in her life, and her mother did her best to soothe her. Norma urged Valerie to come home if she was feeling so distressed and lonely. She offered the comfort of the family's embrace, hoping it would ease her daughter's anxiety. But Valerie, unwilling or unable to articulate the depth of her fears, abruptly ended the call. Norma, preoccupied with the demands of daily life, tried to reassure herself that Valerie just needed some rest. They had plans to meet the next day for shopping, and Norma believed that everything would be fine. That evening, Valerie sent her mother a brief message wishing her good night and assuring her that she felt better. It was a small relief for Norma, who interpreted it as a sign that Valerie was on the mend. Besides texting her mother, Valerie also reached out to her best friend, Jeffrey Anderson. They had been close for nearly a decade, and Valerie often turned to him for support. She shared her worries with Jeffrey, and their conversations seemed to lift her spirits. Jeffrey's calm demeanor and thoughtful words always had a grounding effect on her. By the time their chat ended, Valerie seemed more at ease, a flicker of her usual resilience shining through. Feeling a little lighter, she prepared for bed, knowing she had worked the next morning. Tuesday, January 29th, began with an eerie quiet. Norma had planned to meet Valerie that afternoon, but when she tried calling her daughter, there was no response. At first, she didn't panic. Perhaps Valerie had overslept or was simply preoccupied. Norma assumed that as soon as Valerie had a moment, she would call back to explain. However, hours passed, and there was still no word. Norma's initial patience gave way to unease, but she tried to quell her fears. After all, Valerie had seemed fine the night before. Maybe she had turned off her phone to catch up on much-needed rest calm. What Norma didn't know was that Valerie had not shown up for work that day. She hadn't called in sick, nor had she informed anyone of her absence. This was entirely out of character for her. Valerie was responsible and conscientious, rarely missing a shift without good reason. By Wednesday, when she missed another day of work and continued to ignore calls from friends and family, the situation began to feel dire. The bookstore's management, concerned by her unexplained absence, also tried to reach her, but to no avail. It was only then that Norma's mind returned to the haunting words Valerie had spoken on Monday night. The memory of her daughter's panicked voice, her ominous fears about her own life, surged back with alarming clarity. Norma's worry transformed into full-blown fear. She called repeatedly, but every attempt went straight to voicemail. By now, it was clear that something was terribly wrong. Desperate for answers, Valerie's parents reported her disappearance to the New Rochelle Police Department. Within hours, photographs of Valerie and detailed descriptions of her distinguishing features were circulated throughout the area. The urgency of their actions was driven not only by the mystery surrounding Valerie's disappearance, but also by a chilling context. In recent months, there had been several attacks on women in the vicinity where Valerie lived. These incidents had ended tragically, casting a dark shadow over the community. The first step in the investigation was a visit to Valerie's apartment. Detectives found no immediate signs of a struggle or forced entry, but their observations raised subtle yet troubling questions. Scattered across the apartment were tiny specks of blood, on pillowcases, in the toilet, and on the bathroom floor. Initially, these traces didn't seem overtly suspicious. The investigators considered benign explanations, such as a minor injury or a nosebleed. However, other findings in the apartment deepened the mystery. Valerie's phone, iPad, wallet, some clothing, and even a small pillow was missing. The first thing that came to the investigators' minds was that the girl had run away. Perhaps she had gotten involved in something criminal or was hiding from someone. That's how the police reasoned, but the parents categorically disagreed with this assumption. They were 100% sure that Valerie would have notified them of her departure. She was not the type to vanish without explanation, especially knowing how much anguish it would cause her family. Such behavior was entirely out of character for the kind and conscientious daughter they knew so well. Norma shared with the police the disturbing details of Valerie's and foreboding thoughts prior to her disappearance. Valerie had confided in her mother, expressing an intense fear that someone was out to harm her, even kill her. Now, Norma berated herself for not probing further into the origins of such a chilling belief. At the time, she had assumed that Valerie's fears were tied to her recent breakup. It seemed plausible that her daughter's emotional distress over the end of her relationship might have influenced her mental state. Consequently, Valerie's ex-boyfriend, the one she had broken up with just days before, became the initial focus of the investigation. However, the guy was soon excluded from the list because he actively participated in the search for his girlfriend and had an alibi. In the days that followed, the police, along with Valerie's family and friends, turned to social media for help. Their pleas for information spread quickly, eliciting a flood of responses. Among the many tips received, one came from a friend who claimed to have seen Valerie near the New Rochelle train station just days earlier. According to the witness, she had been wearing a dark green coat, black jeans, and black shoes. Another individual reported seeing someone who resembled Valerie in Manhattan. Yet another claimed to have encountered a similar-looking girl in a city bar. The police diligently investigated each of these leads, but none of the sightings could be confirmed. Disappointment weighed heavily on the Reyes family as false hope gave way to more questions than answers. To gain clearer insight into Valerie's movements, investigators decided to examine her financial activity. They tracked her bank account and discovered several withdrawals from her debit card, totaling over $10,000, made at ATMs in New Rochelle. This revelation brought a new dimension to the case, suggesting that someone had either coerced Valerie or stolen her card. The police promptly requested surveillance footage from the ATMs in question. Reviewing the recordings, however, required time and patience, both of which were in short supply given the escalating urgency of the situation. Finally, on the morning of January 30th, detectives uncovered a critical clue. One of the surveillance videos captured a figure resembling Valerie near an ATM early that morning. The grainy footage showed a young woman in a dark coat, her face partially obscured. When the images were shown to Norma, she hesitated, but eventually acknowledged that the girl bore a striking resemblance to her daughter. For the first time in days, a glimmer of hope appeared in her heart. The photos were released to the media, accompanied by a plea for the public's assistance. Despite the widespread dissemination of Valerie's image and details, no significant leads emerged. Days stretched into a week, and still, the trail remained cold. The police and Valerie's family grew increasingly desperate, their search yielding nothing but mounting frustration and sorrow. Then, on the morning of February 5th, 2019, the unthinkable happened. A group of workers in Greenwich, Connecticut, approximately 10 miles from Valerie's home, was performing routine road maintenance in a wooded area. At around 8 a.m., one of the workers noticed a red-orange suitcase lying a short distance from the road. The suitcase stood out against the natural surroundings, looking neither weathered nor discarded. Its appearance immediately raised suspicions. Curiosity overpowered caution, and one of the workers approached the suitcase. As he unzipped it, An overpowering stench filled the air, forcing him to recoil in horror. What he had discovered was more than he could have imagined. The police were summoned to the scene, arriving swiftly to investigate the chilling discovery. Inside the suitcase was the lifeless body of a young woman. The shirt was unbuttoned. The victim's shoes were missing. The girl's knees and ankles were bound. Her wrists were also tied with tape, and the victim's mouth and chin were wrapped in several layers of duct tape. Further examination revealed the extent of the brutality inflicted upon the victim. Her face and head bore multiple injuries, indicating that she had been severely beaten before her death. Her nose and cheekbones were broken, and her skull showed signs of fractures. One side of her face was so swollen and bruised that it was barely recognizable. The decomposition of the body suggested that she had been dead for several days. The body was promptly sent to the forensic laboratory for a detailed autopsy. The following day, the medical examiner confirmed that the cause of death was strangulation, revealing that Valerie had endured an agonizing final moment. The process of formally identifying the deceased required the presence of her family members. Valerie's father and older brother stepped forward, deciding to protect Valerie's mother, Norma, from the unimaginable pain of viewing her daughter in such a state. Despite the extensive injuries that had rendered Valerie nearly unrecognizable, both men confirmed without hesitation that the body was indeed hers. The devastating truth was now undeniable. But this revelation was just the beginning of the nightmare that the Reyes family was forced to endure. As if their grief was not enough, a deeply disturbing incident added another layer of torment. It was later discovered that one of the road workers who had found Valerie's body had taken a photograph of the horrific scene. The worker, showing a shocking lack of judgment, began sharing the image with his acquaintances, recounting the gruesome details of their discovery in the wooded area near the main road. His callous actions didn't stop there. He even contacted a news magazine, offering to sell the photo for publication. The Department of Public Works, where the man was employed, quickly learned of his actions. Mortified by the insensitivity of their employee, they placed him on administrative leave pending an investigation and issued a public apology to the Reyes family. While the apology was necessary, it brought little comfort to the grieving family, who were struggling to cope with the immense pain of Valerie's loss. Amid the turmoil, the police intensified their efforts to unravel the mystery surrounding Valerie's final days. Investigators again tracked her banking activity, uncovering a series of transactions that painted a chilling picture. The first withdrawal from her account occurred on January 29th at approximately 5 a.m., just hours after her last conversation with her mother. Surveillance footage from an ATM revealed a man dressed in black pants and a black hooded sweatshirt, his face obscured, withdrawing cash. The camera also captured the license plate of the vehicle he was driving. Detectives traced the plate to a rental agency and identified the vehicle as a Honda, rented for a brief period spanning January 28th and 29th. To their shock, the individual who had rented the car was none other than Valerie's ex-boyfriend, Javier Enrique de la Roas. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. Over the next several days following Valerie's disappearance, Javier had made multiple cash withdrawals from her bank account, withdrawing over $10,000 in total. The evidence against him began to mount. But who was Javier Enrique de la Roas? Born on January 3, 1995, Javier hailed from Venezuela, a nation grappling with a catastrophic economic and humanitarian crisis. He was among the millions of Venezuelan refugees who had sought safety and stability in foreign countries. Javier arrived in the United States using a special provision that allowed residents of certain countries to stay in the U.S. for 90 days without a formal visa. When his permitted time expired, he made the decision to remain in the country illegally, unwilling to return to the turmoil he had left behind. Settling in Flushing, New York, Javier lived a modest and transient life. He took on various jobs, working for a cleaning company, then as a barista, and later as a cook and waiter at a fast food restaurant. He kept a low profile, avoiding any actions that might draw attention to his undocumented status. To those who knew him, Javier seemed like a kind and helpful individual. Friends described him as thoughtful and reliable, someone who always extended a helping hand. Yet beneath this outward demeanor lay a man whose life would take a dark turn. In January 2018, Javier's path crossed with Valerie Reyes on a dating website. From the moment they began communicating, Javier was captivated by her. He poured his energy into winning her affection, showering her with attention and affection. His social media became filled with posts proclaiming his admiration and love. Javier's devotion was intense, and when they finally met in person, he was determined to make her an integral part of his life. But Valerie did not share the same intensity of feelings. While she appreciated Javier's gestures, she wasn't ready for the kind of serious commitment he sought. When Javier proposed that they move in together and start a life as a family, it only served to create distance between them. Valerie understood early on that her boyfriend, Javier, wanted much more from their relationship than she was willing to offer. She wasn't ready to commit her life to a man, not when she had such grand plans for her future. However, Javier wasn't prepared to let her go so easily. Despite her clear decision, he continued to call her multiple times a day and bombarded her with an unrelenting stream of text messages. Valerie felt suffocated by his persistence and resorted to blocking his access to her through all messaging platforms and social media. But even these measures did not deter him entirely. He always found new ways to contact her, seemingly fueled by an obsession that ignored her boundaries. Norma, Valerie's mother, had been aware of her daughter's relationship with Javier. From their early interactions, Norma had sensed something unsettling about the young man. He seemed controlling, and as time passed, it became evident that he had no qualms about resorting to manipulation to get what he wanted. Norma recalled an incident where Javier fabricated a story about his mother dying of cancer, hoping to evoke Valerie's sympathy and lure her into a meeting. It showed how far Javier was willing to go in his attempts to regain Valerie's attention. The actual romantic relationship between Valerie and Javier had lasted only a short time, but his pursuit of her stretched on for much longer. He refused to accept her rejection, using various ploys to reinsert himself into her life. His last overt attempt occurred in September 2018, when he reached out to Valerie under the pretext of needing to discuss an issue involving her debit card. After this incident, Javier seemed to disappear from her life. On February 11, 2019, Javier was arrested at his rented apartment in Flushing, New York. During his initial interrogation, he offered multiple conflicting explanations for his actions. First, he claimed to have found Valerie's wallet discarded on a street in Manhattan, containing both her debit cards and a slip of paper with the PIN number written on it. Javier insisted he had not seen Valerie in over a year and had no connection to her recent disappearance. However, when police presented evidence that he had rented a car and traced its location near Valerie's residence, his story shifted. Javier now admitted to being near her apartment but denied any interaction with her. Under mounting pressure and confronted with photographic evidence of Valerie's body in the suitcase, Javier changed his story yet again. He confessed to visiting Valerie on the evening of January 28th. According to his account, what transpired was a tragic accident. He claimed that their meeting, despite months of estrangement, turned passionate. He described a scenario where they were so caught up in the moment that they accidentally fell off the bed, causing Valerie to hit her head on the floor. When she became unresponsive, Javier claimed he panicked. He taped her mouth shut, supposedly to prevent her from screaming if she regained consciousness, and bound her hands and feet. Then, in what he described as a desperate act, he stuffed her body into a suitcase and disposed of it in a wooded area. However, his story did not align with the forensic evidence or the accounts provided by Valerie's friends and family. Firstly, Valerie's close acquaintances unanimously stated that she would never have voluntarily met with Javier, let alone engaged in an intimate encounter with him. She had made it abundantly clear to everyone in her life that she wanted nothing to do with him. Secondly, the autopsy report revealed that Valerie had died of suffocation inside the suitcase. Layers of duct tape had been wrapped tightly around her face, preventing her from breathing. If Javier's version of events were true and he had acted out of panic, it raised the question, why would he go to such calculated lengths to bind her body, seal her mouth with tape, and then withdraw money from her bank accounts in the following days? The young man offered an explanation for his actions, claiming that he intentionally made himself visible on the ATM surveillance cameras because he wanted to be caught by the police. According to him, after everything that had happened, he couldn't forgive himself and felt he deserved retribution. However, this statement only raised more questions. If guilt weighed so heavily on him, why didn't he simply turn himself in and confess his crimes? Valerie's mental state in the days leading up to her death and her last conversation with her mother made it highly unlikely that she would have willingly invited Javier into her home, let alone engaged in any romantic encounter with him. Furthermore, the injuries found on her face and body, injuries that could not have been sustained from a mere fall, directly contradicted Javier's narrative. These glaring inconsistencies left detectives questioning his version of events. Yet, the crucial piece of the puzzle still eluded them. What was Javier's motive for committing such a heinous act against the woman he had pursued so obsessively? As the investigation progressed, detectives began piecing together a possible motive. On January 24, 2019, just a week before Valerie disappeared, Javier sent a text message to his new girlfriend claiming he had caught his ex in bed with a neighbor. This claim, however, was categorically false. Valerie would never have gone to Javier's home willingly. Investigators speculated that Javier had discovered Valerie was seeing someone new. His possessiveness and obsessive nature would have made this revelation intolerable. He likely viewed Valerie as his property, and the mere thought of a rival enraged him. The evidence painted a chilling picture of what transpired on the night of January 28, 2019. That evening, Javier rented a Honda car in Flushing, New York, and drove to Valerie's apartment in New Rochelle. He arrived in the early hours of January 29th, parked near her home, and placed his phone in airplane mode to avoid being tracked. Despite this effort, cell tower data later confirmed that his phone was within 300 feet of Valerie's residence before the signal abruptly vanished. Whether Valerie let him inside or he forced his way in remains unknown, but it wasn't long before an argument erupted between them. Forensic evidence revealed that Javier's DNA was found on swabs taken from Valerie's chest and genitals, as well as under her fingernails. This indicated intimate contact, but it was far from consensual, as Javier claimed. Valerie's friends and family were adamant that she wanted nothing to do with him. The forensic findings and the injuries on her body suggested she resisted his advances, leading to a violent struggle. During the altercation, Valerie sustained a severe head injury, multiple facial bruises, and a broken nose. The evidence painted a grim picture of an enraged attacker overpowering a terrified victim. When Valerie lost consciousness, Javier escalated his brutality. He wrapped her mouth and chin in multiple layers of duct tape, immobilized her hands and legs, and stuffed her into a red-orange suitcase. A suitcase they had purchased together during the early days of their relationship for a trip that never happened. Valerie was still alive when he zipped the suitcase shut and transported it to the trunk of his rental car. She suffocated within minutes, unable to breathe due to the tape covering her mouth and her broken nose. Javier's actions following Valerie's death revealed his calculated efforts to cover his tracks. After placing the suitcase in his car, he returned to her apartment and meticulously cleaned the scene, which explained the lack of evidence found by investigators. He then unlocked Valerie's phone using her fingerprint and combed through her messages, searching for details about her recent interactions and relationships. He also retrieved her banking information. With Valerie no longer able to resist, Javier's next moves were chillingly pragmatic. He drove to a wooded area in Greenwich, Connecticut, and dumped the suitcase along a secluded section of the highway hidden by trees. At this point, it's unclear whether he knew Valerie had already died, but his actions suggest he was indifferent to her fate. On his way back to Flushing, he used Valerie's phone to access her bank accounts and withdraw money from various ATMs. To dispose of evidence, he threw her phone into a river from a nearby bridge. Javier didn't stop there. He took Valerie's iPad and one of her pillows from the apartment. Later, he exchanged the tablet for a new computer monitor, casually carrying on as though nothing had happened. His subsequent behavior showed no signs of remorse. On February 12, 2019, Javier Enrico dos Rojas was charged with kidnapping resulting in death. For this crime, he faced the death penalty or life imprisonment. It took some time to bring the case to trial. Javier's defense tried to portray him as a victim, hoping that the judge would remove the death penalty from the agenda. The lawyers argued that this was the guy's first crime, committed out of jealousy. Prior to this, he had a reputation as a decent person with no previous criminal record. His refugee status also played into the hands of the defense team. He experienced depression due to separation from loved ones. He was a broken man who sincerely regretted his actions and understood the horrifying nature of his behavior. On February 5, 2020, Javier Enrique dos Rojas pleaded guilty to kidnapping Valerie Reyes and actions that led to the girl's death. In court, he fully repented and said that he would never forgive himself for what he had done. He did not even dare to beg the Reyes family for forgiveness, knowing that he did not deserve it. When Norma, Valerie's mother, took the floor and expressed in words the pain she felt at losing her daughter in her prime, Javier could not hold back his tears. He quietly sobbed in the defendant's dock. On September 23, 2021, 26-year-old Javier Enrique dos Rojas was sentenced to 30 years in prison for kidnapping resulting in death. Due to the fact that he was in the United States illegally, he will be deported back to Venezuela as soon as his sentence expires.